Hey everyone, welcome back to Unapologetically Outspoken and happy Friday, everybody. So, on Wednesday, we spent a lot of time, I think, talking about the whole Signal app scandal. And we have just a few updates for you guys because, like I thought, it is just not going away. We were talking about Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor in chief from The Atlantic, who was somehow inadvertently added to the national security group chat, which Stephanie, tell me if I'm wrong, but I still don't think we have a clear answer yet as to how he ended up on the group chat.
Not that I've heard of,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I guess Elon Musk is looking into it, which is awesome.
Yeah. So we'll see where that leads. But one of the things I mentioned on Wednesday was that he was basically threatening to release more detailed messages from the text thread since the Trump admin was denying that there was classified information. So he made good on that promise on Wednesday after our podcast, and he released a series of messages, and they included basically a step-by-step plan that Pete Hegseth wrote down that detailed very specific timeframes for what they were going to do. So I'll just read an example, not the whole thing, but for example, it said 12:15 Eastern Time, F-18's launch first strike package, 13:45, trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also strike drones, launch MQ. So this timeline goes on for the next couple of hours, and it details what weapons will be launched and the times. But Stephanie, I did not see anything in the details that were released that indicated exactly where the target location was or any specific names. So the question is this technically classified information or not? And the Pentagon's chief spokesperson, Sean Parnell, is saying no. He said there's not enough detail in these messages to be considered, quote, war plans.
Right, because that's what the guy was calling it, war
Mhm.
plans.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to play this clip because I was listening to Megyn Kelly this morning, and she put together this great compilation of Goldberg going around the media circuit, just sounding so virtuous. Like he's not going to release the full message because that would be wrong. And then how a day later he releases everything. So it's kind of funny, but listen to this.
The last thing I want is to see American lives endangered in any way.
Which is why you didn't include it.
And Jeffrey, you rightly didn't publish, of course, the details of everything you saw in that exchange, so I don't expect you to repeat them here. But again, I don't want to go into details because I don't think it's responsible to
It's not
put out
responsible.
operational issues. And as much as I enjoy national security investigative reporting, I don't need strike plans 2 hours before a launch. That should not be coming into my phone. I mean, I take this stuff very, very seriously.
The White House press
Do
secretary.
you?
I've said you're lying. I've said there are no war plans there. I've said there's no classified information. So the obvious question is, shouldn't you now demonstrate it? Shouldn't you publish the text?
No, because they're wrong. I have a pretty clear standards in my own behavior of what I consider information that I consider to be in the public interest, even if it's technically classified or not. I'm sticking to my principles here.
I'm sticking to my principles and, I have all these values, so I'm not going to release it. Less than 24 hours later, he released everything.
Yeah, exactly. And so because of what he's released, now there's a whole other issue going on because part of the conversation text thread after the attack, Walls writes like that it was a successful strike and there was a building collapse. And from what I saw specifically, he said, quote, their first target, the top missile guy, we had a positive idea of him walking into his girlfriend's building and it's now collapsed. And then JD Vance replied, excellent. So now the narrative is that the United States is committing war crimes because we targeted a residential building. And then here we have national security officers and the vice president applauding this by saying, excellent, like job well done, right? So my question is this, Stephanie, how is this really any different from the U.S. providing weapons, ammunition, and drones that the Biden admin gave to Ukraine for the past 3 years that quite literally have just decimated civilian populations, both in Russia and Ukraine? What about the weapons we've supplied to Israel and also to Hamas throughout the Biden admin? And, this is Like, yes, it's detailed, but civilian death is just, it's part of war. And I'm not trying to be callous. It's not pretty, but it's a fact. And nobody made a big deal about any of this that was going on during the Biden admin for the last 4 years. But now it's a big deal. And like, it's an unspeakable horror because it's taking place in the Trump admin.
Well, not only did they not make a big deal, but like you said, they very much have pushed that we have to stay in Ukraine. We have to
Mhm.
keep doing this. Trump's the one that was saying we have to stop killing people. People
Right.
shouldn't keep dying. And the left is the one that's just continually pushing it, and we have to show support for Ukraine. So it's all bullshit. I mean, they don't care. They have no values. They're just trying to find anything they can to make the Trump administration look bad. I mean, this was a terrorist. It's not just some average Joe.
Right, exactly. And something else that's coming out of these conversations, and it's definitely making waves in Europe and also with, the left and anything against Trump, is some of the details that were released about this conversation. There was part of the chat where JD Vance, Hegseth, and Waltz, they were basically talking shit about Europe being incapable of taking care of things and having to rely on the United States, which is true. So you can't really argue that. And we touched on this on Wednesday, but I guess more details of the conversation were released, and I saw them yesterday. And Walls apparently wrote, European navies do not have the capability to defend against the types of sophisticated anti-ship cruise missiles and drones the Houthis are now using. So whether it's now or several weeks from now, it will have to be the US that reopens these shipping lanes. And then JD Vance's response was, quote, I just hate bailing Europe out again. And then Hegseth agreed and wrote, VP, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike is correct. We're the only ones on the planet, on our side of the ledger, who can do this, end quote. And then reportedly, continued texting about how the United States needs to get some kind of compensation from Europe for these strikes. So clearly it's not making us look good.
Well, yeah, but it's not really a surprise. I mean, JD Vance sat there in front of every European leader and said, hey, we're done. You need to build up your military. This is ridiculous. And I think this just proves his point. I mean, Europe doesn't have the same capability of a small terrorist group in Lebanon. Like, are you kidding me? And so the way that I see it is this is just further confirmation that Europe needs us a lot more than we need them. And that, yes, Vance was right. They do need to build up their military. And, the EU can sit there and bitch about Trump and talk about how they're going to put all these tariffs on us in response. But at the end of the day, we still help them out and save their ass. So, this whole thing with Europe getting all up in arms about everything that JD Vance said, I feel like this whole interaction completely proves his point. And I think it makes them look worse than we do, actually. I don't know. That's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but I get that this was embarrassing, right? And it's not a good thing by any means. But I do think it's getting ridiculous because when you look at the media, I mean, they are running full force. It's all you're hearing about.
Yeah.
Yet, for 4 years, they turned a blind eye to Biden's mental decline, cocaine being found in the White House, the Hunter Biden laptop, millions of illegal migrants invading our country, the Biden administration going after moms and Catholics, saying they're domestic terrorists. So I just think it's a little silly at this point that the media is giving a text chat more attention than they gave the botched Afghanistan withdrawal that left 13 service members dead.
Yeah.
And I hope more people see through that.
Yeah, because this was actually a very successful operation and nobody's focused on that fact because it's all about this Signal app. And obviously Waltz is now a target and the MSM is trying to expose basically anything and everything they can about him. So the other issue that's getting a lot of attention related to this is I guess his Venmo account was unsecured and it was open to the public. So, and doing all their digging, they found his friend list, which has 328 people on it. Many of them were, other US politicians and government personnel, but he did have some journalists on there. So he had Brett Baer and Brian Kilmeade from Fox News, And then he also had Breonna Keller and Kristen Holmes from CNN. So why is this such a big deal? Because apparently his list being open, like so the public can access it, obviously makes it really easy for someone to pretend to be one of Waltz's contacts, which clearly could lead to all sorts of shit, espionage, scams, who knows what else. And then at the same time, all this was being reported, a German news outlet reported that they were able to get the cell phone numbers, email addresses, and passwords belonging to Waltz, Tulsi Gabbard, and Hegseth, and they were all very easily hacked online. Considering these are all top officials in Trump's cabinet, like this does have potential to be a pretty big problem. And from what I read, like right afterwards, this was exposed, Tulsi's account and then also Wall's, like their Venmos were no longer open to the public. So, you know, they're trying to stop whatever's going on, but is it like too little too late?
Okay, this is freaking me out because I use Venmo all the time. I had no idea whatsoever that people could go in and see all this information. No clue. But here's my perspective. I just want to like make sure I'm understanding this correctly because when we talked about this the other day, I was like, this Waltz, I don't trust him. Sounds like he knew this guy somehow and like he definitely, had this guy's number in his phone. But with everything you just said, it's sounding more like someone could have hacked into his phone, changed the contact name, and like implanted this guy's phone number, which would actually make what he said a true story when he was like, I didn't have his number, but he was kind of backpedaling. And I did see a more recent interview because that one with Laura Ingraham like made him look so bad, I thought. He did another one where he clarified and he's like, this guy, I did not know him. His number was not in my phone. And then that's when he said, I had Elon come and he's going to look into it. And I think they were talking about this on Megyn Kelly, but they were all just like laughing like, okay, so Elon's just like the average tech guy now that's just going and like fixing everyone's passwords. And it's just funny. But I do think it makes me, understand why Trump's giving this guy another chance and that maybe there was something nefarious going on. And then what makes me also think that is this is what I'm seeing on social media. Okay. Like a lot of people were looking at the hearing where Ratcliffe said, Signal was installed on my phone day one by the CIA. And you have to think on day one, all of the Biden administration was still, or they didn't go and like fire everyone in the CIA and hire new people. And so a lot of people are questioning, like, were there Biden admin players in the CIA that put this on the phone and somehow sabotaged it or are surveilling him? I mean, hell, they surveilled Trump while he was president last term. So it's totally possible. I don't rule it out at all. But again, like I said the other day, I think this is just a reminder that everyone in the Trump administration better watch everything they say at all times because they're likely being surveilled on their phones, in their offices and buildings. And with all the information that keeps leaking out to the press, in a way, I think it's a good thing because like you said, this was a mission that was completed. They did everything right. And just imagine if it was something. So it's a good warning for them to like watch every step you take.
This is reminding me of a Netflix show I watched recently. I can't remember what it was called. Something like Night Watch or Night Guard or something. It was like this one guy in the CIA or FBI whose responsibility is to just guard the telephone for the night call, which is, God, I sound
Oh, I
stupid.
think I saw the trailer for that.
Well, it was actually really good. The first season anyway.
Mhm.
And it was one of those things where they realized they couldn't trust anybody. Like everyone that was in charge in the government was undermining everybody else and like nobody could be trusted. And then it was almost like a Jason Bourne kind of thing, but
Yeah.
not.
Well, that's like Trump's first term, he went into it trusting that a lot of these people who have been in place know what they're doing. And so he's going to trust them and they all screwed him. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he knows more than anybody, but I think it's a good message for everyone in his cabinet. Like, hey, you better watch out. And
Yeah,
Vance, oh my God, he was probably like shitting his pants knowing that he kind of went against Trump
Mhm.
in the text.
Which the MSM is playing that up too, because they're like, oh, look, they're, he's going to have to get rid of JD Vance. Trump probably regrets making JD VP because he's speaking out against Trump, blah, blah, blah.
Or they could say, wow, look, he's not just following whatever Trump says blindly. He's questioning things. There's checks and balances. But no, they're going
Exactly.
to look at it the negative way.
Of course, always. And it's like, I really hope at this point that if Elon is in charge of this investigation, that we'll find something out soon. But this is really spiraling because now there's a bill being proposed in Congress to criminalize sharing classified information on outside messaging platforms. And this was introduced yesterday by House Democrat Rep. Richie Torres from New York. Okay, Stephanie, this is called the Houthi PC Small Group Act. Now, that's all in capitals. And this is an acronym. So listen to what this acronym stands for, what the actual act is called. Homeland Operations and Unilateral Tactics Halting Incursions, Preventing Coordinated Subversion, Military Aggression, and Lawlessness, Levies Granting Rogue Operatives Unchecked Power. Is that ridiculous or what?
Are they going to add in classified documents can't be kept next to Corvettes or in Chinatown or in Penn State offices? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And if this act does get passed by Congress, violators would face 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. So Torres was interviewed on a podcast yesterday, and I want to play this clip from X.
The signal scandal that's happening right now. I know you've got some thoughts on that. I saw some legislation that you're proposing. I may be the first person to talk to you since this got leaked. I don't even know if you announced it. I saw on Axios they mentioned it. So what's going on?
Well, I did not announce it on Signal, but I'm introducing legislation that would make it a crime to send classified information like war plans on an insecure messaging app or insecure channel of communication like Signal. The cruel irony of the national security apparatus of the Trump administration is that it's become a threat to national security because it cannot be trusted to properly handle classified information. And so my bill would make it a crime and would create a powerful incentive for the proper handling of classified information. But everyone involved should be fired. The defense secretary should be fired. The national security advisor should be fired. Like the breach of classified information was so outrageous that it could have put lives at risk.
I'm surprised this isn't a crime already. I mean, what is the distinction?
Okay, I'm sorry, but let's just go back to the fucked up Afghanistan withdrawal where none of those people were fired, right? And again, this app was approved for government use. It was used during the Biden admin. So this whole like holier than thou attitude coming from the Democrats, it's just fucking gaslighting. And then on top of what he's trying to do, Ilhan Omar is planning to file articles of impeachment against Hegseth Walls and John Ratcliffe. And again, this coming from a woman who should have been impeached herself a long-ass time ago.
Who's very supportive of terrorist organizations. She's like
Right.
Hamas's biggest cheerleader. Yeah, the whole thing is ridiculous. And again, like when I was listening to Megyn Kelly, they brought up a good point because they were talking about like while the media is just running with the story 24/7, it's all they're talking about. If you look at the polls, their polls, which we know are skewed to the left, Trump, his approval rating is better than it has ever been. It's better than it was the day he was elected. So they can keep talking all they want, but I'm telling you, like all it's doing is getting more and more people to wake up to the bullshit and go on to Team Trump's side, or at least realize the media is full of shit.
Yeah, and the other thing they're focused on is someone else who was in the group chat that was not supposed to be there. Not a journalist. It was Joe Kent, who's the nominee to be director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And I guess the problem with that is he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate yet. So Democrats in Congress are jumping on this as well, calling it a fuck up, saying the Trump admin is reckless and incompetent. So I think they're just going to keep digging and digging and digging and do what they can to try to get these people fired.
I mean, the Trump admin is so reckless. Meanwhile, you have the left with these Tesla threats that are just getting more and more amplified because at the Tesla dealership in Austin, they found incendiary devices like all over the place. They had to call in the freaking bomb squad. Yet you're not hearing anything about this on the mainstream media because they're too busy talking about Signal. And where are Democrat politicians? They're cheering it on. You know, it's like, to me, that's a hell of a lot more reckless. That could endanger the lives of American citizens that are completely innocent. And it's just like, remember when the right didn't like what Target and Bud Light were doing with the trans agenda?
Yeah.
And like, remember how they didn't firebomb buildings? Remember like how they didn't destroy property or incite violence? They just simply boycotted their products and it was very effective. Yet, why is it like whenever the left doesn't like something, they immediately light it on fire? Like literally light it on fire and try to burn it to the ground. And at the same time, they turn around and they call people like Trump and Elon Musk dictators, Nazis, fascists, while they light shit on fire. Like it's just the hypocrisy again is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn is calling them out on it. And she brought a resolution to the Senate this week denouncing domestic terror attacks on Tesla owners and dealerships. And when I first heard this, my eyes were rolling. I'm like, okay, another strongly worded letter that basically does nothing and goes nowhere and holds no one accountable. But when I listened to her on a couple interviews, I realized what she's doing is forcing Democrats in the Senate to publicly denounce this. Like their vote will be public on whether or not they're going to denounce these terror attacks on Tesla or whether they're going to support it. And I don't think at the end of the day, it means a whole lot in terms of holding anyone accountable. But I do think that it's hurting Democrats in the court of public opinion. And it's just confirming to people that the Democratic Party has become the party of hate, chaos, violence, and crime. So I think it'll be interesting to see how people vote on it.
Yeah.
All right, so this brings me to the next topic of crazy stories, which is that more than a dozen Trump supporting influencers like Gunther Eagleman, which uh I didn't know at first until Aaron brought him up, and that'd be awesome if we could get him on the podcast. But there were like 12 of them, I think, and it was even including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who were all swatted. So, in case anyone doesn't know, this is where someone calls the police saying that something terrible happened, like a murder at the person's home. And so the police will show up armed and expecting a threat. So, one example was Larry Taunton, who was one of the influencers that this happened to. And the swatters' call to 911 said that there were 3 hooded men going through the house executing people. So this is what the police hear and think that they're showing up to. And so this guy was woken up to a light flickering outside and his German Shepherd rushing to the door. So he peeks outside and all he can see is a man with a rifle. And of course, his first thought is like, this is an intruder that's going to kill me and my wife. And so he gets his gun out. He's ready to shoot them when they walk through the door. But luckily, before that happened, he realized it was police. But I guess there's been a ton of not a ton, but quite a few tragedies in the past due to this whole swatting thing. So in 2015, there was a police officer that was shot while attending a call like this, but thankfully survived. And it was a situation just like this, where the guy thought it was an intruder. He shot the cop. And then in 2017, a police officer shot and killed a man when his gamer buddies thought it would be funny to swat him. And so one of the gamers received 20 years in prison, and the other one got 15 months for calling it in. And then in 2020, a man had a heart attack when someone swatted him. And so that swatter got 5 years in prison. So, anyhow, of course, you know, everyone in the Trump administration's looking at this. The Department of Homeland Security Director Kristi Noem and then FBI Director Kash Patel said that they are looking into it. And Senator Mike Lee is suggesting that those responsible be charged with attempted murder. So I got to ask, as a police officer, was this a thing when you were on the police force?
Yeah, it actually was, except I don't think we ever used the term swatting. And
Oh.
I'm sure it happens in LA pretty frequently, but I think by the time this became popular, I was no longer in patrol, so I didn't respond to anything like that. But I did in Washington, and we got a lot of calls like this, and we normally chalked it up to like, you know, mentally ill people calling or just, because we get these repeat crazy calls like this. But I never had an incident where I almost shot somebody because of one of these calls or anything happened. It was usually you'd show up and you'd talk to the person and figure out nothing happened. And like that was
Mhm.
it. And I don't think they ever traced any of the calls or anything. It was just that was it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I heard with everything being online. And then a lot of these swatters will use like AI voice when
Mhm.
they're calling it in. And so it's almost impossible to track it. But I don't know. I mean, if the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are involved, maybe they can. I don't know. But I think people think like, oh, this will be funny or like, oh, I'll show
Mhm.
them. And they don't realize this is like incredibly dangerous and it's highly illegal. And you could go to prison for like 20 years, like that one guy.
It should absolutely be a crime to make these kind of calls because not only are you setting up a situation for potential injury or death, but you're wasting police officer time and resources. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just abuse of the 911 system, basically, and it should be a crime.
Yep.
So I got to switch gears on you because I don't think we've had a good Doge update this week. And I've got some good ones for you, Stephanie. So I want to start with the Social Security admin. Okay, these numbers are insane to me. So this is within a 2-week time frame, okay? Doge has found nearly 7.1 million social security numbers for people over the age of 120. And we've touched on this before in past podcasts where they were starting to find all these dead people with social security numbers. But apparently there are another 5 million Americans that are currently listed as eligible for federal benefits in the system that still have yet to be marked as deceased. And the Daily Mail did a really good breakdown of how these numbers have transpired so far. So, DOGE started cleaning up records in the Social Security admin on March 8th. So, technically, it's been less than a month at this point, okay? 1.8 million people were listed between the age of 120 and 129 who have been removed. 4.9 million people were listed between the ages of 130 and 149 that have now been marked as deceased and removed. And then another 407,000 people were listed as being between the ages of 150 to 159 years old who were still showing eligible for Social Security in our federal government. Please tell me, like, that is not insane.
It's totally insane, but I believe it. I remember when my mother-in-law passed away and we were like, getting everything in order, shutting off her bills and everything else. And that was one of the things I did was call Social Security and just say like, "Hey, I have the death certificate, so stop sending the checks," because my worry was they're going to send the checks. We're in Florida. This is Illinois. Someone's going to get the checks, cash them, and then we're going to be like on the hook for it. When I called, they were shocked. They were like, "No one ever calls. Like, thank you. Thank you for calling." Like, they were absolutely shocked that I was reporting to them so checks could stop being mailed, which I thought was insane.
Yeah, so does this mean that potentially 7.1 million people are committing Social Security fraud?
Yeah, sounds like it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely crazy. And they all need to be caught. So
Yeah.
the other the other thing that Doge announced this week was that they terminated 113 wasteful contracts that were valued at $4.7 billion. So let's take a look at what some of these are. And Stephanie, I'm sure you've already guessed that they are all related to DEI and climate change. And on top of that, they are all contracts in countries other than the United States. So here we go. 10 million for gender equity in the Mexican workplace, $12.2 million for worker empowerment in South America, $6.5 million for improving respect for workers' rights in agricultural supply chains in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, $5 million to elevate women's participation in the workplace in West Africa, $4.3 million to assist foreign migrant workers in Malaysia, $3 million to enhance Social Security access and worker protection for internal migrant workers in Bangladesh, $3 million for safe and inclusive work environments in the southern African country of Lesotho, $145,000 for USDA consulting contract for Peru climate change activities.
And what do you bet not a dollar of any of that actually went to a person? They all went to NGOs and
Yeah.
into some probably offshore bank accounts somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So as of this week, as of Wednesday, so far, DOGE has reported that they've saved American taxpayers $130 billion, which, if you break it down to every taxpayer in the United States, that would be around $807.45 per taxpayer. I'd be happy to save $807.
Yeah, I would too. I wonder where they're getting the $5,000 from, or maybe that's what they're anticipating by the time they next year rolls around. But either way, yeah, this is all of this stuff needs to be cut. I mean, come on, like who hasn't talked about this in the past about all the wasteful spending? You know, like Rand Paul would always do his Festivus report. And now there's actually someone for the first time that's doing something about it and cutting it. And the poor guy is getting his dealerships bombed, or they're setting up bombs.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. But anyhow, Elon is just, I don't know. This guy is superhuman. He's superhuman. I don't know how he does it all. He's fixing Mike Waltz's phone. He's doing Doge. He's doing all these interviews. And now he has a petition to oppose activist judges. So this one is specifically for Wisconsin registered voters. But if you sign the petition as a Wisconsin registered voter, you get $100. If you refer someone who signs it, they get $100. And then he is randomly choosing people to give $1 million to. So the first $1 million winner was Scott A. from Green Bay. And I guess he's announcing the next one today. So if there's anyone listening that's a Wisconsin registered voter, go freaking sign the petition. It's on Elon's X account, or the website's petition.theamericapac.org. But I thought good for him, because remember he did this while they were campaigning to try and get people to register to vote. And they were trying to say it was illegal and everything else. And I just love that he's doing it again. And he's rich. He can afford it.
Between him and Trump, like, I don't think either one of them ever sleeps.
Yeah, that's probably why they get along so great. They probably talk at like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So, okay, I cannot wait to talk about this. There was a hearing in the House DOGE subcommittee with the head of NPR and PBS, and it was awesome. It got so heated. The Republicans did a really good job of highlighting the partisan biased games that these outlets have been playing. And shockingly, there were so many admissions throughout the hearing. You know, normally they'll try and skirt the issue and like not answer the question. They were admitting things left and right. So NPR's Catherine Maher was asked, like, why did they refuse to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story? And why did NPR call it unserious and a distraction? And so her response to that was, quote, "We were mistaken in failing to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story more aggressively and sooner." So it's like kind of an admission, right? Well, then I have this clip, and it's from the hearing where Texas Rep Brandon Gill, who is amazing, calls her out on like lie after lie and brings receipts to prove it. So listen to this.
You took a day off to fully read the case for reparations. You put that on Twitter in January of 2020.
I apologize, I don't recall that I did.
You think that white people should pay reparations?
I've never said that, sir.
Yes, you did. You said it in January of 2020. You tweeted, "Yes, the North. Yes, all of us. Yes, America. Yes, our original collective sin and unpaid debt. Yes, reparations. Yes, on this day.
Okay, why did you call President Trump a fascist and a deranged racist sociopath in 2020?
Congressman, I appreciate the opportunity to address this. I regret those tweets. I would not tweet them again today.
Do you believe?
So that's just like a small snippet. Isn't that hilarious? He's like, yeah, you did.
Yes, you did. No,
I
I
have it right
didn't.
here. Yeah, I guess that guy is married to Dinesh Suiza's daughter, which I didn't realize, but I'm gonna have to keep an eye on him because it was just awesome. And he just had this like, you know, very like plain face, like he's not showing any emotion. He's just like, yeah, you did. Like, this is awesome. It was great theater, I gotta say. So anyhow, the chairman of the committee is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And she said at the end of it that she's going to be referring NPR and PBS to the DOGE team for funding cuts. And so President Trump was asked if he would support this. And he said, quote, they spend more money than any other network of its type ever conceived. So the kind of money that's being wasted, and it's a very biased view, you know that better than anybody. And I'd be honored to see it end. So I think that means yes. And I don't think that people realize like how big of a deal this is because this is essentially state-sponsored media, aka propaganda. Like the government is paying them and they're turning around and giving the most biased view. You know, other things that were brought up during the hearing was like how they have 60 some odd Democrats, registered Democrats, and like 0 Republicans on their team, on their editing staff, and just, you know, how many times they use the term far right, which was like hundreds of times, versus using the term far left, which they only did 6 times, and just stuff like that. So it's like, cut the funding and let's stop this brainwashing of Americans.
Yeah, completely. I remember when I was younger, I thought NPR was such a cool channel because they had, like Prairie Home Companion and stuff like that on there. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized how political that channel actually is.
Yeah. Well, I
So,
think when
yeah.
we were younger, I feel like the left and the right, it was like the uniparty. So we
Mhm.
didn't realize it as much because they were all on the same team. I think once Trump came along, it's like that's when things really started to get just so apparent.
Yeah, completely. Okay. I've got to give a Newsom update because, as you know, he is my new obsession. Not even new. So, anyway, I'm just going to keep talking about him now. But his podcast, right? I am clearly not the only one who's paying attention to that. And it just might be biting him in the ass because Linda McMahon and the Department of Education just launched an investigation into California's Department of Education. And part of it is over alleged violations of FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act. And this is the act that ensures parents have the right to have access to their children's educational data. And we've talked about this many times before, how California basically does anything they can to prohibit parental rights. And they have a law that prohibits schools from requiring personnel to disclose a child's gender identity to the parents, which is more than likely a violation of FERPA. So I originally saw this on Fox News. So on Thursday, yesterday, Linda McMahon sent a warning to Newsom to comply with federal law barring transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. And the reason for this is because of the podcast episode that he did with Charlie Kirk, and the clip of Newsom, that's going viral or went viral a few weeks ago, where he said he agreed that it was deeply unfair to have biological males compete against female athletes. And then during that same conversation, he also talked about how he wouldn't condemn a trans athlete in California. And this athlete, like, basically slaughtered all the actual female competitors in the long jump competition. And I think we played that clip on the podcast too. So I want to read what McMahon wrote to Newsom. She said, quote, "Your recent comments about male athletes playing in women's sports, that it is deeply unfair, came to the attention of my office this week. I'm writing on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education to request a clarification on your stance as governor of California and to inquire as to your intention to encourage California public schools to comply with federal law on this issue. Many are confused by your office's silence on the harms of substituting gender identity for sex in other areas of the school environment. Allowing participation in sex-separated activities based on gender identity places schools at risk of Title IX violations and loss of federal funding. As governor, you have a duty to inform California school districts of this risk. As Secretary of Education, I am officially asking you to inform this department whether you will remind schools in California to comply with federal law by protecting sex-separated spaces and activities. I am also officially asking you to publicly assure parents that California teachers will not facilitate the fantasy of gender transitions for their children," end quote. So I absolutely love that. And then the other thing the Department of Education announced yesterday was they are revoking waivers to California and Oregon colleges and universities that have been using federal funds to provide services to illegal migrants.
That's crazy that they're taking funds that are supposed to be for education and using it for illegal migrants. I'm not surprised at all, but what the hell? And okay, so what do you think about his podcast though? You think this will get him to end the podcast? Because
Well, the last couple episodes, he has had Democrats on. So I'm going to check right now and see if there's a new one, because I think I talked about the latest one he had on Wednesday, and that was the last one he had, and that was with Ezra Klein. And that's where they were talking about, why it's so expensive in California. And then to that point, I did read this article where he's basically, so many people have left California, right? Because it's too expensive to live there. And he's totally pushing back on that. And one of the things they were talking about in that podcast was the housing crisis and all of the regulations in California in order to build, right? So he's pushing back on that. And he's saying that, California has 18% of the world's research and development production takes place there. And the only two countries that are better than California in production are Germany and China. And that California does 41% more manufacturing than Texas, and that, 16 other states tax their poorest residents more than California taxes its wealthiest residents. And we are not a high tax state. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. I live there. I've lived there. You are a fucking high-tech state. And it's just, is this podcast just going to continually get him in more hot water? Or is it just going to keep attention on him? You know what I'm saying?
Like, people want gaslighting. Like, that's what he's doing, is gaslighting people by saying California doesn't have everyone knows California has high taxes. Like, and that's the thing, I don't think he realizes he's pretty stupid, I mean, yeah, he's good looking and charming and whatever, but he can't go up against people like Charlie Kirk. It's just not going to work.
Well, that's why I'm waiting to see who his next podcast guest is.
Yeah, maybe he'll just start picking people on the left that are going to kiss his ass. That's my guess.
Yeah, we will see. But also going on in California, I have to bring this up because I saw this article on Interesting Engineering, which is normally where I get like my crazy robot and AI stories, but this one's different. So Trump recently signed an executive order to fast track these domestic mining projects so that we can try to decrease our dependence on China for critical resources like lithium. And Stephanie, guess where one of the world's largest untapped lithium reserves is?
Los Angeles.
It is in California. It is apparently under the Salton Sea. So scientists recently discovered 18 million tons of lithium, which is valued at $540 billion, which could be a game changer for basically revolutionizing our lithium battery industry and reducing our dependence on imports from China and Australia and Saudi Arabia. And I guess this discovery was the result of a Department of Energy study, and they originally believed that there was maybe 4 million tons of lithium under the Salton Sea. So to find out that it's 18 million tons is a pretty massive discovery. But is Newsom going to be on board with mining this lithium? Because he reportedly called it, he called this discovery the Saudi Arabia of lithium. But California is like the world's leader in environmental and sustainability regulations. So are they going to actually allow this mining? Is it going to be one of those things that even if they do, it takes 40 years to comply with California's regulations for, sustainability? So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But tell me if you agree. I think mining in the Salton Sea would probably be a better option than allegedly planning accidental fires and weather manipulation that we've seen over the past few years, where conveniently communities are destroyed where there just happens to coincidentally be rich mining resources.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because to mine lithium, you need an extraordinary amount of water, which I don't think would be an issue with this. Like, I'm assuming they can just use the salt water in the sea. But I mean, California, like, there's never enough water. But you know what I heard? The fires that just recently took place erased the past 20 to 30 years of all the environmental progress they made. So anything they did to try to save the environment over the past 20, 30 years, this was enough pollution to completely wipe that out. So I don't want to hear any environmental bullshit from Gavin Newsom. Okay. Like, get your house in order before you go talking crazy. So some good news to end on is that Pam Bondi announced they arrested one of the top 3 MS-13 gang members from El Salvador. He was living in Virginia illegally, and he's now in custody. And man, Kristi Noem, she did an interview in front of that El Salvador prison.
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit. Like, that's enough to scare anybody. I mean, you look at these guys, I am not kidding, they're shoulder to shoulder. They don't get like a bunk and you get the top bunk, I get the bottom. You're shoulder to shoulder in this prison. You're like an animal. It's crazy. So she was basically saying, like, yeah, this is where you're going to go if you're an illegal criminal in our country. And then more good news is President Trump signed an executive order requiring proof of citizenship to vote in a presidential election, and that
Good.
mail-in ballots have to be received by election day, not postmarked, but actually received.
So wait a minute. You can't be California and still be counting votes in March?
Yeah, like this could actually give us election integrity again. What? Well, of course, the left can't have that, so they're going to fight it in court because Democrats are saying this is unfair to people without proof of citizenship. No shit. They're not supposed to be voting.
Yeah, you cannot make this shit up. Oh my God.
But I mean, come on, these are the same people that said it's racist to require a photo ID. So I
Right.
mean, that's what we're dealing with here. So they're going to take it to court, but Trump said any states that don't comply with this are going to lose federal funding. So
Good.
that's a pretty good motivating factor.
No state should be, I mean, we've talked about this before. I don't think any state should be allowing mail-in balloting unless you're a military overseas and you have to vote by mail, or you have some kind of disability where you can't get to the polls. And other than that, everyone should have to go to a fucking polling place, show ID, and vote.
And the votes be counted on election day.
Correct.
Like, that's happened all throughout history.
Mhm.
Up until Trump came around.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's awesome. So yeah, more good work. They're going to keep talking about Signal, but there's a lot of really positive things happening when you get through the noise of the left. So anyhow, that's what we have for today. And I had to look at my phone to remember that it's Friday. So everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday. Thanks for tuning in.